Testing. Yeah.
This one.
here for another Pour and Sip live tasting. This one is a little bit different. Thank you so much if you joined us last time. We had an absolute blast. There are a few different things this time. First of all, we are going out on even more platforms. So if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter or Instagram, thank you for tuning in. You're so welcome. It's so great to have you part of this. Wherever you're watching us, we want to hear from you. Pop your questions into the comments box, or whatever your platform has, presuming it's comments box. We're going to taste 3 whiskies this evening, but first and foremost, you'll notice there's a second person here, which is incredibly exciting.
Everybody.
This is Andrew, aka London Whiskey Guy. Andrew, I mean, give us some context. Who are you? Why are you here?
I am Andrew, but some of you guys may know me as London Whiskey Guy. I blog, Instagram, all about whiskey, and I'm just a whiskey lover, like I'm sure most of you guys are, whiskey enthusiasts. And yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to try these drams, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys and hear from us and Malt and Pour and Sip. This is awesome. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, it should be a brilliant evening. We are going to taste 3 whiskies this evening instead of 5. We did all 5 in one go last time, but what we really want with Pour and Sip is for this to be a community, for it to be like super interactive. So we thought we'll take the time, we'll go through 3, we'll spend a bit of time getting really like in depth, in detail about them all. And so yeah, the ones we're going to taste tonight, if you've got your hot packs in front of you, we're going to do GlenAllachie. Then we're going to do...
I'm going to do the Starward, which I'm super excited about.
And that's an amazing whiskey. And then we are going to loop back and do the One Orange Cask. But before we get going, I just wanted to say welcome if you're brand new. If this is your first time getting a Pour and Sip box, you are so welcome. Whether you're new to whiskey, whether you've loved whiskey for a long time, it's amazing to have you here. If you are brand new, you would have got this box, which has got your tasting glasses in it. You'll need them. Make sure that you've got them. If you haven't joined this time, if this is your second month, your box will look a bit more like this. And we're going to crack it open right now, just so that we can see what's inside, which is very exciting. Andrew, you've got yours as well. You're cracking it open too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to get into it. So the very first thing you'll notice in your box is your tasting notes, which you've got right there.
I've got the tasting notes here.
Tasting notes right here. So
this is super cool. Yeah,
the best thing about them is you can pop your notes on the back. So yeah, if you're tasting along, don't just take our word for it, right?
No, absolutely. These tasting notes, they're here for you guys to be kind of saying what you think about the whiskey. It's totally subjective, so there is no right or wrong answers. So these things are really awesome for you guys to kind of taste along with us. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. And then just make sure you've got your whiskies underneath right there.
That's the most important
thing. The most important
bit. That's definitely the most important thing.
We are here for the whiskey, right? So yeah, we're doing GlenAllachie, Nova, and the One Orange Cask finished. So yeah, let's get stuck in, I think. First of all, so the reason we chose these 3, so this has been, I don't know, my most favourite and most challenging part of this month really is picking which 3 whiskies we're going to do today and which 2 we're going to do next time, which is the 22nd of October, by the way. And we were having a little chat and we thought we were going to choose these 3 because they've got one thing in common, which is they've all got a really, really cool focus on cask maturation.
Yes, absolutely. And they're all 3 different types of cask maturation. So we've got some cask finishing as well. So we've got Pedro Jimenez and Oloroso casks over here. We've got red wine barrels over here, and we've got orange wine cask finishing over here, which is definitely something I'm super excited to try, having never tried orange wine cask finish whiskey before.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I think whiskey can be super experimental these days, is with kind of casks and what's been in that cask before, because I wanted to have just get super geeky for a second about why casks are important to whiskey. To be called whiskey in Europe, in the UK right now, your spirit has to have been in an oak vessel, an oak barrel, an oak cask for a minimum of 3 years. So what that means is you know that your whiskey is going to have had that amazing flavour influence from that oak. Casks are magic. I think casks are magic. I wish I'd studied chemistry at school so that I could get super in depth about it.
I didn't really like chemistry at school, but I have to say, getting into whiskey has kind of opened my mind into kind of these kinds of scientific kind of nature of mixing casks and kind of choosing different casks, and seeing what is really interesting for me is seeing what other types of spirits can influence a whiskey, and that's really what I'm excited to get into here today.
Yeah, for sure. And the super basics about why that is important and why that works is because if you think of a cask, it's like a lung, it breathes. Casks are hopefully watertight. We've got to keep our whiskey in the cask. But they're not airtight. So you get evaporation and that forces the liquid to move in and out of those staves, that wood, which influences the flavour, right? And there's a few factors that can massively influence that. The size of the cask is super important. Smaller casks will have more of an impact, right?
And if it's been used before, which is also super important, if they're first fill or refill. I think the ones we're doing here today, I can't remember. But yeah, so this is another super important thing when it comes to kind of cask maturation.
Yeah, think of your cask a bit like a tea bag. So my mother, shout out if you're watching, she's like a little bit of like, I would say a cheapskate actually, but no offense if you do the same. She's like, I've got these fancy tea bags. I can get 2 cups of tea out of the tea bag. The first cup of tea, the first time you use it, will be like pretty strong, pretty intense. The second time you still get some flavour of that tea bag. The third time, like none at all, then it really does need to go in the bin.
This is an awesome analogy, by the way.
It's quite good, isn't
this
it?
one before.
So it's like you don't need to put your cask in the bin once you've used it a few times, because actually, if you're aging whiskey for a long time, you probably want to stop getting that cask influence after a certain point. But yeah, first fill, second fill, it really will make a difference.
Absolutely. And when we get second fill, a lot of producers, they will kind of toast, they will char, and they will scrape their barrels to kind of sometimes remove the spirit content that had been there before. But actually, interestingly, we're going to see a barrel here that has kind of been left with that spirit content inside of it to kind of allow the other spirit to be able to kind of soak up all those flavors, and the whiskey will change completely. And that is what's super exciting about this one, actually.
Yeah, and even like regardless of how dry or wet, I guess, your casks are, because you've got that movement between the spirit and the oak going in and out of those oak influences, whatever's been in that cask before will influence what you're putting in there next. So we're going to see that with the very first whiskey. I feel like we should crack on,
not
right?
even to mention about the climate as well.
The climate! Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about this. Yes, talk about climate.
Yes, no, so absolutely. I mean, we're going to see here, I mean, this is an Australian whiskey. I want to, no spoiler alerts. So these are kind of crazy climates in Australia. So that is going to be super different to kind of the climate you're going to get in Islay, the climates in England, and again in Speyside. So very hot climates are going to ask the kind of, and fluctuating climates are going to kind of ask the whiskey to work a bit harder with the barrel. The barrel's going to contract, expand, and it can accelerate the maturation process. When a cooler climate, a more stable climate, you can actually age your whiskey for a lot longer. So we're going to see that a lot today with some of the whiskies that we've chosen for you guys.
Yeah, for sure. And this is really what is so exciting about getting geeky about these whiskies, right? There's so much flavour, there's so much flavour experience, and a whole bunch of that can come from processing. And in this instance, we're talking about the cask and the role of the cask. So now we can get on to the whiskey.
This is the important part. This is the important part.
We like don't want to chat
tasting
too
whiskey.
much. So very first up, if you are watching and you've got your box in front of you, we are going to explore the GlenAllachie 12-year-old. So this bottle right here. This is a fascinating distillery for me. It's got a really interesting history. So for a long time, it was owned by Shivers Brothers. So they own loads of big brands, obviously Shivers Regal. They own distilleries like the Glenlivet, like Longmorn, like names you'll probably know if you drink single malt, or you might see some of these names down the pub. So they sold this distillery to a chap called Billy Walker in 2017. He's kind of like a bit of a distillery entrepreneur, I guess you could say. And what he did, he took it over. It used to be a distillery used predominantly for blends. So, a lot of your big name blends will have maybe 20, 30, 40 different distilleries going in them with their component parts. And that'll be a mix of single malt like this and grain. But distilleries that are used for blending, they're generally quite highly renowned. Like you need really good quality whiskey to get these blends to be really good. But what Billy and his team have done, they've said, right, we are going to refocus, not necessarily completely, but really put a focus on what we can do as a single malt and bring this distillery right to the forefront. Right here, we've got the 12-year-old. I'm just going to pour myself some now.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, this has got, 3 different casks in it, right? It's got
it's virgin oak as well, isn't it?
Yeah, virgin oak. Yeah. So we were chatting a bit earlier about what's been in the cask before, how that influences. But if you've got brand new oak, that's kind of like a whole flavour profile of itself. It will be pretty vibrant, yeah, pretty spicy, a lot of vanilla going on, similar to some of the vibes you get from a bourbon often. But this is with Pedro Jimenez and also Oloroso sherry. So it's a wonderful, wonderful mix. I wanted to get a little bit geeky about the distillery itself. A fun fact about GlenAllachie is it's got 4 stills, but 2 spirit safes. Spirit safes? I'm not sure the plural of that would be. But yeah, typically a distillery would just have one. A spirit safe is kind of like where the old sort of tax person would, check out what's coming through, what the output is, so that you were paying the right amount of duty. Yeah, they've got 2, which is really fun. And something that Billy Walker's done a lot, his previous distilleries as well, is focus on fermentation. We're not going to get too into fermentation now. I feel like something we can talk about another day.
And the previous distilleries being Glendronach, Glenglassaugh and Benriach.
Yeah, exactly. They all ended up having a super long fermentation. That brings out these types of flavour compounds called esters, which are typically like really big, really fruity. And that's the profile he's going for right here, which he's achieved through the long fermentation, but also through these casks, which I think is really, really, really beautiful. I don't know, what kind of notes are you getting?
I mean, like instantly, having mentioned Glendronach, I kind of getting, actually surprisingly for a Speyside whiskey, I'm getting a similar kinds of Glendronach-y Highlands kinds of feel from this, actually. But it's super, super sweet. I'm going to get, like, I don't know, it's really desserty and bready for me. Lots of kind of like chocolate brioche even. Kind of orange peel. I mean, it's really wonderful on the nose for me.
Yeah, it's such a typical kind of sherried Speyside for me in some ways. Christmas cake notes.
This is really Christmassy. And actually, I mean, the Pedro Jimenez and the Oloroso really show up in this on the nose, like straight from the off. You can absolutely smell.
Yeah, they really come through. We want to hear what you think as well. I'm now getting almost like a slightly meaty vibe, I think. There's something like savoury and deep in there, kind of almost beyond those really dark fruits.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I'm getting like forest fruits, definitely like blackberries and things like that. So it's, and I like I said, I can't go over the fact for me, it's just so desserty. I can get like creme brulee, chocolate brioche, like I said before. Yeah, it's that's a really, really wonderful nose.
Yeah, and this is the fun thing, like we just saw the nose, right? And we're already getting like an abundance of notes.
So I'm not really getting that. I'm trying to find that savoury note. You're finding here the meaty note. But,
yeah. Let us know what you think, because, and this is the main fun thing about Pour and Sip for us, is we want to get talking about whiskey. We want to get chatting about it. We want to get sharing about it. We want to hear your thoughts, your tasting notes.
And there are no right or wrong answers, are there? That is literally the main thing. Everyone has different palates. It's very subjective. Even you came in today and you said you were getting a completely different nose from another whiskey that you had from previously, that smoke was showing up in another one. So it can change on a daily basis when you try whiskey again.
I think as well, it massively depends even things like what time of day you're tasting, right? So we're tasting now at like 6:30, 7:15 even, and we've had lunch.
Yes.
Maybe we've had dinner. And this
While
is just
ago,
wine even, yeah, I mean, well. And that's going to influence what you can taste. When I've sort of been on spirits panels judging, we'll often do stuff in the morning, like 10 a.m, 11 a.m, your palate's clean. You can really get sort of in depth, really examine it. But yeah, this is really fun. I'm going to have a little sip.
I'm with you there.
Yeah, this is 46%, by the way. Cheers. So maybe add a splash of water once you've had a taste, but it's not too boomy. You'll be all right.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so it's actually a super coating arrival for me. Like the mouth feels really, really creamy and wonderful on the arrival. And actually, surprisingly, the back palate, what I wasn't getting in the nose, I'm getting some kind of spicy, kind of almost like pickled ginger, peppery notes coming through on the back palate that just weren't there for me on the nose. And maybe, there is something more savoury that's coming through there on the finish that I wasn't expecting from the nose. But yeah, I'm like still on the instant, the arrival, those kind of desserty notes that I was talking about on the nose, they show up. And when we were discussing the sherry cask, especially sherry cask finishing, tends to kind of impart on a whiskey those Christmassy notes, those kind of baking spice notes, so cinnamon and things like that, and raisins and prunes and things like that, and they're all showing up in this whiskey.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we've got a note here from OCD Whiskey. Always find a nice fig note in the 12, lots of chocolate too.
Yeah.
Hear you on both, like fig rolls is such a thing for me. What kind of chocolate? For me, this is like a really dark chocolate. I'd be interested to know like what specific chocolate you're getting. But yeah, keep these coming in. Love, love, love seeing the tasting notes. And your thoughts in general, has anyone tried GlenAllachie before? What do you think?
I mean, I actually last night tried the 15 just because it was in a tasting pack that I had. And this is just, it's so different to the 15. The 15's got a much more leathery kind of quality. And this is just, I mean, I'm definitely a fan of this.
I'm quite happy with this on a day like today. I mean, the sun came out a little bit, but here in like the south of England, it feels super autumnal. This is a whiskey for this kind of season. Like, it's
absolutely
a delight, really.
Absolutely. And it doesn't hit, like, considering 46%, it's quite healthy percentage, but it's not really, I'm not getting much alcohol burn at all without water. So I actually wouldn't personally add water to this right now. I feel like I'm not getting that much burn from this at all.
Yeah, I feel like if you're going to add water, it's literally personal preference, right? It's entirely up to you. There's no right or wrong.
Totally.
If you're finding that a whiskey, any whiskey, this one, another one, is that little bit too much of a prickle for you, it's a bit too warming, drop a couple of drops of water in. I'm going to attempt to show you something which I'm probably going to make an absolute mess of, but this was a trick someone taught me at a whiskey festival once. If you're worried about adding water to the whiskey, have a little sip of water, then while the water's in your mouth, have a bigger sip of the whiskey, and then you kind of get the dilution experience without actually putting it in your glass.
I'm not going to try that for the first time on camera. I'm not going to try that for the first time on camera. No,
like you can take water, well, you can put water in, but you can't take it out, so yeah. So yeah, that's super interesting. I think the finish as well is an interesting thing to chat through.
Yeah.
It's really coating. For me, this is like a medium long finish. There's quite a lot going on still.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting that chocolatey note now. It's actually coming through on the finish as well, towards the back palate. And like you said, it's maybe a darker chocolate that's slightly more bitter than a milk chocolate. And the finish is, yeah, it's long. There's lots to chew on there. It's for me, it's like And those spices that I was talking about, like the cinnamon and the baking spices, they're showing up on the finish for me.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting spice mix, just to go a little bit deeper. Because I think a lot of the sort of maybe slightly nutmeggy vibes are from the sherry cask influence.
Totally.
But I think more of the cinnamon kind of pepper is from that virgin oak. And I think I said this before, it's a bit like being a whiskey detective when you taste these and you're trying to like unpick what the distiller, what the blender's done.
Totally, and actually, in saying that, like I feel like the Oloroso cask is showing up quite a bit more than the Pedro Jimenez. Pedro Jimenez tends to kind of impart much darker flavors, like the raisins and the figs and stuff. And Oloroso, you do get that kind of spicier, nuttier element, and I'm getting that a lot more on this cask.
Yeah,
and on this whiskey.
It's wonderful. We've got a few comments coming through as well. Peter Gould has said, although he has a bottle, I haven't opened it yet, so this is my first taste. Welcome along. Creamy, peppery, lovely.
Yeah.
Nigel has said it's really smooth for an inexperienced taster. It is really smooth, like for sure. And if you're feeling like, oh, maybe this is only the first few whiskies you've tried, just keep tasting as much as you can, because
that's what I was saying about this. It's a smooth. It really goes. I would call this an easy sipper. And funnily enough, like through this kind of selection that we've got here, there are whiskies, not one that we're trying today, which is definitely not an easy sipper here, but we'll get onto that kind of another time. But this is definitely, if you haven't got that much experience with this, is just one of those, I think this would be a great gateway whiskey to get you in. It's sweet, it's got that spicy element, it's Christmassy, it's smooth.
Yeah, it's a good
well
one.
done, Billy Walker.
Yeah, well done indeed. We've got a comment from the Maltcast, which is lovely. Another great lineup for box 2. Well, we've only on the first one, so I think on that note, should we crack on with the second?
Yeah, so now for something totally different. We are heading way down under to Starward Distillery in Australia. Australia is actually going through a bit of a whiskey boom at the moment, which kind of started around 1992 when Bill Lark set up the Lark Distillery in Tasmania. And I think the kind of moment where Australian whiskey was put on the map was 2014 when Sullivan's Cove won at the World Whiskey Awards for Best Single Malt. And now they're over, I think, we don't consider Australian whiskey when we talk about whiskey, especially when we first get started in whiskey. But now there are more than 50 kind of distilleries selling whiskey on the market in Australia. But unfortunately, we can't get our hands on most of them because they're mostly reserved for small batch production, for single cask, private cask production. So it's very difficult to kind of get it in England, to get it in the States. However, David Vitale comes along, who actually ironically worked at the Lark Distillery and then moved to Starward and started up Starward in 2007. So he wanted to kind of make an Australian whiskey that was quintessentially Australian and that was readily available and accessible like everywhere else and could spread its Australian wings. Now, what he wanted to do was show the essence of Melbourne, where the distillery set up just outside of Melbourne, in a whiskey. He actually said, this is a quote, that if the winemakers in Australia had the audacity to take on the old world of wine, why doesn't whiskey do the same? And that, I think, is super cool, and it really reflects what he's trying to prove in this whiskey. So Melbourne is notorious. It's got buzzing kind of food culture, craft beer scene, crazy climate, and love for red wine. Like, we consider now Australian red wine to be a very famous red wine. And what David Vitale wanted to do was kind of make a whiskey that kind of represents those quintessential Melbourne qualities and kind of encapsulates the spirit and essence of Melbourne. I think we should just pour the dram actually first while I'm yapping on, just to give it kind of because I do like to let a whiskey kind of sit in the glass for a bit. Actually, someone said a minute in the cask, a minute in the glass actually to sip. But this actually,
I like that actually.
Yeah. So this, when talking about cask finishes, we discussed the GlenAllachie, which has been finished, which has had its second maturation in Oloroso, Pedro Jimenez and Virgin Oak cask. The interesting thing about this whiskey is it's been 2 years exclusively matured in ex-red wine barrels. And these ex-red wine barrels are from the nearby in Australia, and actually none of the ingredients come from more than a day's drive away, which is local to Australia, not so, which is not in Scotland, wouldn't be so local. It's 100% malted barley, Australian barley, and like I said, the red wine casks are from the Barossa Valley and the Yarra Valley, and they're Pinot Noir, Shiraz and Cabernet. So that's the super interesting thing about this, is how the kinds of these red wine barrels are going to influence this whiskey. And another super interesting fact is these barrels were wet filled. So usually when we were talking previously about cask maturation, you know, when you get a new barrel, you will toast it, you will char it, re-char it, scrape it. These barrels haven't had much of that at all. They've kind of been lightly steam washed. And that is to allow those residues of the red wine to kind of linger in the cask and impart as much of those bold and fruity flavours onto the whiskey. And I think we're going to kind of see that when we try it. The other super important thing about this is the Melbourne climate. So we were previously discussing how a really warm climate can change the kind of influence of the whiskey and how it's matured. Melbourne is notorious for having the 4 seasons in a day. So you can 1 minute it's hailing outside, the next minute there's sun come beaming down, it's a heat wave. And this affects whiskey production massively. So this will like kind of accelerate that maturation process and make the barrels kind of contract and expand. Now the interesting thing is when you talk to, when Starward talk about their whiskey, they say it's been aged for 3.5 to 4 Melbourne years. The Melbourne years are because of that hot climate and the changes in temperature. So you've got an accelerated maturation process. Actually, I knew I was going to love this distillery, and this is really geeky, because you take one letter out of this and it's Star Wars, and you can tell me in the comments how sad I am, but that really kind of made me go, I'm going to like this distillery. But yeah, that kind of acceleration of maturation, you couldn't leave this whiskey in a barrel in that kind of climate for maybe over 5-6 years, because it's going to become over wooded, it's going to become over oaked. So 2 years is super young, 2 of our years, 3.5 Melbourne years. Maybe we'll get that on the nose, sorry, when we try it. So we'll have a look now. And actually you can see there is this kind of wonderful kind of reddish hue to it that you get, a kind of like rusty rosé maybe.
I like that, a rusty rosé. Just to say super quickly, if you are watching on Instagram and you're struggling a bit because we're shooting in landscape and obviously Instagram's portrait, don't forget you can check out Pour and Sip on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter as well, and we've got like the full width going on over there.
We're on all the platforms.
All the platforms.
Literally all the platforms. You cannot miss us tonight.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah, if Instagram's not working for you, don't forget we're on all the other ones. All the other ones.
All the other ones.
But yeah, back to the whiskey, short intermission over.
So yeah, let us know as well your tasting notes of this one, because this one again is super interesting. I think for anyone who hasn't well actually I should say that when we talk about sherry cask maturation, it's we talk about sherry bombs. So we think of whiskies like the Glendronach 15, like the Aberlour Buna, any Glenfarclas 101 for example, but I've never come across a wine bomb.
Well, until now perhaps.
Until now, I think because I'm smelling this and it is so heavily fruit driven. Like red fruits, strawberries, raspberries and cranberries are coming through massively, but like ripe cranberries. And you can absolutely smell the influence that those casks have had over this whiskey. Yeah,
you can. I mean, I would say when we do like Wine and Spirits, Education Trust stuff, we talk about stuff in terms of how pronounced it is, how loudly the whiskey is shouting. This is like bordering on pronounced with these fruit notes.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, it's projecting its voice when it comes to fruit notes right out the glass.
Massively, and again, this is 41% alcohol, so I'm not expecting, you won't expect this to kind of burn your nose or anything when you're going into the glass, because it's, I mean the alcohol, it's just so fruit driven. It's like there are those kind of spicier elements as well here that I was actually got in the GlenAllachie, that kind of cinnamon spice, maybe star anise. It's again, it's a really nice nose. Shall we? Yeah,
let's have a little sip.
Cheers.
Let's do it. Cheers.
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting full-on dessert vibes on the palate. Like, this is like you've had your 3-course meal, now you're sitting down to like some kind of berry cheesecake. Like, it's got a biscuity quality. Like,
well, actually, funnily enough, so David Vitale, again, for the founder of Starward, he wanted this whiskey to sit at the dinner table with you. We were talking about that Melbourne buzzing kind of food culture. And the foodie scene, and he was saying we always have a bottle of wine on the table with us. He wanted to make a whiskey that you could put on the table, and you are absolutely getting that with this whiskey. You can see how it could pair with food on the table, and it's just wonderful.
For sure, we've got a couple of tasting notes come through. I think Peter again has said vanilla and red berries on the nose for him.
Red berries.
Nigel's interestingly said that it seems to have a lighter nose than GlenAllachie. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, the GlenAllachie is a slightly higher ABV, so that might be where the intensity is maybe slightly different. But
I think the intensity as well from the GlenAllachie, that Pedro Jimenez cask can really, and the Oloroso is quite heavy spirit, the sherry. So this is definitely a lighter nose. Actually, fun enough, I'm starting to get a bit of like rose water and Turkish delight.
Yeah, there's definitely a floral element coming through. And Jeff Brown has said, and making us all very envious, visited Starward 2 years ago. The ginger beer finish is or was probably his desert island whiskey. I have not tried that, but I'm fascinated.
Has he tried it at the distillery?
Yeah, have you tried it? Let us know what you thought. I mean, you said it's your desert island whiskey. I've never even thought of a ginger beer finish on a whiskey.
They've got a project, the project series at Starward, and the ginger beer finish is something I've never even... There are distilleries out there who are trying really, really cool things, and that is definitely up there. Maybe one for the next box.
Yeah, I'm salivating with envy, I have to say. We need that here in the UK.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. There's some cereal notes as well that are getting on the nose now as well, like kind of, and it was showing up in the palate as well, maybe kind of like, I don't know where you guys are from, maybe like Weetabix and kind of buttery biscuits kind of notes.
We're getting all bake-off over here.
Yeah,
buttery biscuit bases.
You never see Weetabix at the bake-off though, in fairness.
No, you never know. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, the cereal vibes are there. I'm also getting like, I don't know, like nutmeg. I'm on a bit of a nutmeg run today, I think. And something quite nutty, I think.
Definitely nutty. And that back palate is where those tannins from the wine cask really come in. That's that kind of almost like spicy, is a tonicity to it. I am not 100% sure of that word, so if anyone wants to correct me on the comments, if tonicity is a word, please do. No, so the tannins.
Oh, okay, yeah, I mean, yeah. We've got a few interesting thoughts on the finish, and again, I want your taste notes, good and bad. Like this is us chatting through it. For me, the finish is. I would like it to be slightly longer, maybe, but it's delicious. And we've had some thoughts that it's quite spicy as a finish. I think this is Niley. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. A lovely nose and on the palate, but not sure about the finish. Like that's completely fine as well. Yeah, I think it is a bit short.
It is short, but and in the difference to the GlenAllachie, I'll talk about the coating mouthfeel of that GlenAllachie. It had quite a lot of viscosity and legs. This is quite not thin, but it's light on the palate. That arrival is very, very light, and I think that plays into the finish and why it's a shorter kind of finish. Personally,
I feel like maybe it's just a bit more chilled out. It's got that Aussie vibe going on.
Yeah,
quite relaxed.
No, but I mean, like I said, I think this is definitely verging on the territory of wine bomb, which I don't think I've kind of kind of wine cask finishing is massive at the moment, and we've seen some amazing wine cask finishes recently. You guys can let us know in the comments which wine cask finishes that you may have tried recently. My favourite was the Ardbeg Black, the committee release, which was Pinot Noir from New Zealand, which was a stunning wine cask finish. But those wine notes, whilst they were there, they were slightly more subtle, whereas this is a wine bomb. Those wine notes are really showing up in this, and it is wonderful.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And again, like, let us know what you've tried that this reminds you of as well. It's always, like you were saying, super interesting to know like where you guys are on your whiskey journey, other stuff you tasted.
And other wine cask finishes as well, because it's interesting to compare, especially if you've tried any wine cask finishes recently.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, whiskey is one of my like first love of spirits, like completely, and I'm almost getting into wine through whiskey, which probably sounds like a really strange way to do it, but it's really awesome.
Have you got a favourite wine cask finished whiskey? Have you tried recently?
I'm trying to think now. I really like the stuff Starward's doing.
Yeah, I think great.
The Tawny one, I don't think you'd count that as more of a port than a wine, but that's the one that's jumped to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really getting into red wine cask finishes at the moment. Actually, even white wine cask finishes at the moment. So obviously you don't get as much white wine cask finishes as you do with red wine, but there's some, and sweet wines as well. So I tried a Aaron Sauternes cask recently, which was absolutely wonderful.
That sounds very fun.
Yeah, and also there are, GlenMorangie have literally just released their Tale of Cake, which is the Tokai finished cask. So we're getting even Hungarian sweet wine casks being used for finishing. So we are seeing loads more kinds of happening when it kind of comes to wine cask finishing. Like I said, the interesting thing about this is that it's not a finish. This is exclusively matured in red wine barrels, and it shows.
Amazing. Just a couple more comments come through. Just thinking he managed to get 3 bottles last year. Absolutely love ginger, so the blend of the two was amazing. It's unfortunately limited amount. Have asked them to repeat it. Yes.
Is that the ginger beer cask?
Yeah, ginger beer cask.
I didn't see it come into this.
No, I didn't either. I mean, I'm interested to like where you're based, Jeff. Let us know. Yeah. And Nigel again, definitely detect the tannins. Very nice. Yes. So. Speaking of wine, should we move on to another type of wine whiskey? Because again, it's almost 8 o'clock. I don't know how this has happened. This is an incredibly fascinating whiskey. And this is one that only launched kind of earlier this summer. We did a live with Davil, who's the master blender at the distillery. And sort of literally as they were launching. And it blew my mind what they've done with this whiskey. So the Lakes Distillery, I'll just pour it while we have a little chat about it.
Yeah.
Based in the Lake District in the UK, in England.
And big up the English whiskey at the moment, because the English whiskey scene is exploding at the moment, and it's not just the Lakes. Obviously, we've got Bimber as well, which is very close to me, which is close to my heart. But yeah, there's some really amazing stuff coming out. Cotswolds are doing amazing stuff as well. So it's a really exciting time to kind of have this English whiskey kind of doing interesting things. It's moving on to this cask, which is an interesting bottling, definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's been sort of thoughts for a long time really about how English producers can be, in many ways, a lot more creative and innovative than their Scotch counterparts, right? Because they don't have the same rules and regulations.
Yeah.
And I think the result of a distilling boom, now everything's coming of age, we're seeing some incredible releases.
It's the same with the Australian whiskies. Scottish whiskey is so kind of restricted, just like American bourbon production, to the rules and regulations. In Australia, they've got one line of regulations. There really is not much they have to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And it's the same when we were talking about the Swedish whiskey before and stuff like that. So yeah.
There's some interesting pitfalls to that as well. I mean, Scotch is one of the most protected drinks categories in the world. It's very difficult to, or it should be quite difficult if you're going to counterfeit Scotch because of these rules. So, you know, not saying it's good or it's bad, but the upside for English producers and people in many other countries is that, well, if I want to experiment with something, I actually can. So yeah, the Lakes Distillery. So Davil Gandhi, who's like master blender up there, he used to work with Macallan. He is such a fascinating human to speak to. I've had the joy of interviewing him a handful of times, and he is obsessed with flavour. And he would not mind me saying that. He's like a flavour enthusiast in the extreme. And he always wants to try new stuff. And for this one, what they did, they've got their sort of the one blended whiskey, which is kind of an interesting mix now of liquid they've brought in because they're a very young distillery still, with their own liquid, their own sort of distillates and mature spirit, like whiskey that's come of age, blended in. What they did, they went to Spain and they found some orange wine producers. Orange wine, in this, there are different kinds of wine, not a wine expert, but this is kind of like a white wine where they've macerated Andalusian oranges in it, which is incredible. So it's almost like really heavily orange flavoured white wine. What they did with that then, they seasoned their cask with it. So while their sort of the one whiskey has been maturing in sort of, you know, ex-bourbon barrels, sort of fairly conventional, what you'd expect, they then took that liquid, put it in these orange wine casks, which sounds completely bonkers and absolutely mad, right? But the results is absolutely stunning. And what is super interesting about this one, which we'll get to in a minute, when we have a nose, it's not just sweet. So when I first heard about this, I thought, oh, is it going to be like really like saccharine almost, like too sweet, really sticky? On the nose, one of the first things that jumps out to me is this smoky element. It's kind of like a peated orange wine finished whiskey.
Yeah, there are definite tobacco notes in there as well for me. But actually, you're right, it's not, you are expecting it to have this kind of super sweetness to it, but it's actually more like orange peel and orange zest rather than kind of, I like super sweet orange. There's that kind of acidity to the orange, and it definitely comes in the peel, which is coming across in the nose.
For sure, and this is really what Pour and Sip's about. It's a new whiskey, it only came out this summer. We heard about it, we were like, that's interesting, want to know more. We tasted it, and then it was like, we need to share this with as many people as possible, because I don't know of anyone else who's doing this.
I mean, I've not tried much orange wine, full stop. And
No,
though I heard that, I mean, the family that produced this particular orange wine, this is not, I don't even think it's particularly on the market. I think it's literally a locally produced for local people, if anyone who watches The League of Gentlemen. Yeah, so absolutely, it's super interesting.
It also really makes me want to go to Spain. It kind of like, it feels like suitably like unexpected. Like you don't think of English whiskey or even UK whiskey and come up with this. You're like, this has come from somewhere really different, and it does tell a tale of Andalusia and of the lakes. And it's really wonderful. I mean, on the nose for me, like we were already saying, like, but I still get some of the distillery character, some of that peat smoke, some of that graininess. It's not just that the distillate and the distillery character has been completely masked by this at all, not at all.
No.
So yeah, I'm gonna have a sip of it. I can't wait. Cheers to you guys. Let us know what you think as well. Like, this is like one of these whiskies, they're really like playing at the edge of what you could call a whiskey. So yeah, we really want to hear your thoughts.
Cheers. So apologise to everyone. I tried that before Christy tried it. It was very rude of me.
Couldn't wait to get stuck in.
No, that is exactly what it was. I just couldn't wait to try it. We've been talking about it so much. For me, there's like this kind of like wine gums, candied kind of gummy bear texture, and also kind of notes coming through on the arrival. And now the finish is like, for me, it's just orange zest on the finish.
I feel like the texture for this is one of the most striking elements. It's so round. It's almost juicy. It is like a bouncy jelly kind of texture.
That's where I was getting the kind of wine gum kind of texture about this. It's absolutely, there's kind of a jelly quality to this whiskey is throughout the whole of the palate.
Yep. It's amazing. And we are getting some of your thoughts come through. Do keep them coming in. Katie, great to hear from you. Katie has said orange rinds on the nose. Cooper, sorry again if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Definitely smoke first and then the orange comes through. Yeah, I hear you. I said earlier when we were just doing a super quick run through, I was like, oh, the smoke on this for me is showing so much more today than it did when I previously tasted it, which is fascinating, right?
Absolutely.
How whiskies appear at different times of day.
Different times of day, depends on what you've been smelling throughout the day, depends what you've eaten and drunk throughout the day. And
then Neely or Nelly again, the smoke is lovely. For them, it seems like a great idea, but too much orange, but love the texture. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
When I said that the Starward was kind of a wine bomb, I don't think this is for me quite like an orange bomb at all. The orange notes are, while they are very they're almost they're more subtle than that. And like I said, it's like orange peel and orange zest for me, and a bit of candied orange as well. But it's not quite like orange juice or squash. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's definitely so much more to it. Like the orange is super apparent. It is what it says. It's expressive. And it is directional, but there is other stuff going on as well. OCD Whiskey said Terry's chocolate orange, which I love.
Yes.
Jason, I get smoke too. The smoke is like, really there for sure.
It is totally there.
Yeah, really good stuff. I've got loads of comments coming through now. We're going to wrap this up in a couple of minutes because somehow it's 7:05. I don't know how this has happened.
I want to know what everyone's favourites are out of the ones we've tried today. That is also important. I think I want to tell you guys which one my favourite was.
Yeah,
but you can all guess in the comments, I don't know.
So yeah, get your comments in like literally now and to tell us your favourite, any final tasting notes, any final remarks. We'll have a little bit of a chat about what we're going to do on the next tasting, which is Thursday the 22nd. So a couple of weeks' time. I mean, spoiler alert, kind of right here.
It's a definite spoiler alert.
Two really quite exciting, much higher ABV expressions. So again, the challenge was what three to do, like how to split them 3 and 2. And actually, I think next time we're going to have a really great chat about raw materials. So rye for the Whistle Pig, which is amazing. And it's such a fascinating distillery and such an intriguing story. And then obviously peat and peated barley for the Lafroig.
We are headed to Islay for a peat monster.
Yeah.
That's the one, actually, before I even saw the box, that's the one I say when people ask me, what's the peaty whiskey that really kind of will knock your socks off? This is the one. This is definitely the one. It's up there with the Octomores and the Ardbegs, but this one for me just is my favourite. I'm not gonna lie.
It's really great. So if you can't resist, and in the next 2 weeks you do crack on into your drams, and to be fair, why wouldn't you? They're wonderful. Just keep a little bit back and join us. We'll be there at 6:30 again. Just some final comments coming through. Stewie has said GlenAllachie smells like dark chocolate orange now going back. This is another thing, right? So
definitely having tried that, sorry, 100%, definitely.
If you've got some of your drams left, do go back and re-nose and re-taste, because like
he's right. It's literally that. It's also Terry's chocolate orange as well coming through on that as well. Someone's put that in my head though. Now I'm definitely going to buy some Terry's chocolate orange when I get home. The
power of suggestion. But it's almost Christmas, so it's probably in the shops already. Probably in the shop already. Some more thoughts for Katie. GlenAllachie was a favourite. Nigel says he thinks GlenAllachie, although it was a close call. A very different whiskey, pleasant. I agree. The one is my favourite of the 3. So the Orange Cask is the one that I can't work out who said that, but yeah, another vote for GlenAllachie. So it's a really interesting split, actually.
What about you?
Oh, don't put me on the spot. It's so challenging.
I know this is it's so kind of like you know, it's like what one would be. It's interesting to see which one you know. Sometimes it might surprise you, so you go, that one was my favourite because I wasn't expecting it to be so good. Yeah,
I really like them all. I'm really fascinated by them all. I think. Oh, this is so hard. They're all so different.
That is true as well.
For me, I'm just delighted to be able to share all of them with you, which I know sounds like a cop-out. I think I'd probably come down on... for interest, I'm going to give marks for... 2 marks. For intrigue and kind of experimentation, I think the 1 is incredible. Yeah. As an all-round whiskey, I love the GlenAllachie. Like, I really do. I'm going to say the same. The GlenAllachie, for me, really kind of... It's a beautiful whiskey, and it's not expensive at all. It's kind of an integrity malt, as Ralphie would call it. It's you know, it's non-chill filtered, no added colour. It's just everything a single malt whiskey from Scotland should be. Yep.
and it's a really, really wonderful whiskey.
And just to say, look at the colour of that. Look at the influence these casks have. Just going back to what we were talking about earlier.
That's got the sherry cask written all over it just from the colour.
Yeah, I feel like we talked a lot about how it imparts flavour, but let's not forget, like all of that colour comes from the cask, right? It's
100%. We've seen a kind of reddish hue to the Starward because of the red wine cask influence. We've seen how a sherry butt and the Pedro Jimenez and the Oloroso can affect the dark, kind of deep kind of colour in the GlenAllachie. And even though it's it's not necessarily orange, there is definitely an orange hue coming from that Lakes one, the one.
Definitely. I also want to say I really appreciate what the Starward guys are doing. I think in terms of creating a sense of place and working with local producers and keeping everything close to distillery, I think it's a really, really remarkable whiskey.
Well,
it's really gorgeous.
Actually, just one more point. So David Vitale had said that, like, so if you look at Tasmania, where like a lot of the Australian whiskey is coming from, they've kind of tried to copy, not necessarily copy, but kind of work within those Scottish traditions of how to make whiskey. But Starward are kind of trying to really create this sense of time and place with Melbourne, and do their things their own way, proper Australian whiskey, and that's why I agree with you. It's super exciting because of that.
Yeah, and as well, a lot of these producers, particularly on the world whiskey stage, so the Lakes and Starward, they've really not been going that long. Like a lot of the Scotch distilleries, they've got heritage that lasts for centuries, and this amazing kind of, I would start to say brand equity, but it's not. It's like a processing tradition. These guys have started from scratch.
Absolutely. And they've had to try and find their distillery character right from the start. So fair play to Starward, because they've already found that distillery character, what makes it kind of special already. Whereas it can take years to find that distillery character.
So, we've got a vote for the Australian from Sheldon. We've got another, Stewie said, then we're getting a slight nuttiness on the nose with the one. Yeah, kind of actually. Let me just pick up the right glass. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. Like peanuts for me.
Maybe.
Yeah, he's thinking.
What kind
thinking
of nut? What kinds of nuts? What kinds of nuts? I mean,
what kind of nuts? But yeah, there's no wrong answers here, and everyone's palate is different, and we've all had different experiences in life. We've all got different reference banks.
It's all memory. It's all your memories and what you've smelled over the time, and what you get when you smell a certain whiskey. When you think, oh, that's a nutty kind of smell, a leathery kind of quality to whiskey, that kind of stores in your memory bank, and then every time you smell that bit of leather, that bit of nut, you go, that's on that, and it's just memories for everybody. You're just kind of connecting with your memories, and that's the special thing. So when you're saying about being a detective, that's the awesome thing about whiskey, because everyone's got their own kinds of stories to tell. Yeah,
and Mike's just chirped in last doors. The one is definitely my favourite, just because it's unlike anything I've had before, and I think I would agree.
I totally agree. So I kind of feel like from those comments, there's been like a kind of mix. For everyone's favourite's been the GlenAllachie and the one.
Yep, with some votes for Starward too, which is great.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, that's what we really want to do with Pour and Sip. We've picked out whiskies that we genuinely love, that we're like super excited by for all kinds of reasons: where they're from, who's made them, what they are, the fact they're just delicious. Yeah, really, really brilliant. And just a reminder as well, if you're a member of Pour and Sip, these are all available in the shop online with at least a 10% discount. So if one of these has piqued your fancy, you can give yourself a little treat. Why not?
Absolutely.
Fabulous. So yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming to join us, Andrew.
No worries. It's been great to be here, and I hope you guys have all enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. We are Pour and Sip, so follow us on social. Send us a DM with your thoughts. We always want to know what you think. Your feedback means everything to us. We're all about our whiskey community. So yeah, thank you for getting involved, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time, 22nd of October, for these two. Yes. Have a great rest of your night, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye.